Hello and welcome to another chat. This one's going to be about Dazzle camouflage, that really cool camouflage scheme that was widely used in World War One. I recently did a video looking back on 2024 in the Black Sea, the war in the Black Sea, and one of the follow-ups that was requested was a look at the way that Russia is using camouflage and deception in Black Sea. I want to do that video, but before I do, I need to do this video on Dazzle camouflage. It's kind of a pre-read. Just wanted to say that I drew this picture. So anyone, in case anyone thinks that I use AI art, I don't. This is real drawing. But moving on, I'm HI Sutton. I'm a defense analyst. I'm not a YouTuber. I don't have all the equipment. It is unedited, unscripted. Let's just get on with it. If you're familiar with camouflage, you're probably thinking of that green splodgy stuff that people wear. As you can see in this photo, the three guys on the right-hand side, it doesn't help if you're in the wrong environment. Hiding yourself at sea is a bit like this. If you're a navalist, you might want to actually, rather than hiding your existence, just confuse the hell out of the enemy by having the unusual, confusing patterns. This is called dazzle camouflage. Let's talk about what it is, how it works. So it looks like this. At the time, it was mostly called dazzle painting, but now we know it's dazzle camouflage. And in America, it's often called razzle dazzle. All the same thing. It was applied to ships in World War One, particularly. This is pretty cool. This is a before and after photograph of the same ship. These are real photos from someone's private collection, so to give the slight reflection in the first image, you can see how it transforms the look of a ship. How it's meant to work. Imagine you're a submariner, German U-boat commander. You're looking for your periscope and you look at this ship. You want to torpedo it. You know that you can't just shoot a torpedo straight at it. If it's any distance away, it's invariably going to move before the torpedo gets there. Instead, you need to shoot the torpedo at where you think the ship will be when the torpedo arrives. You need a firing solution. So from the top, it might look approximately like this, obviously much greater distances. But you need to know the range, the speed, and the heading of the ship in order to hit it. Dazzle camouflage tried to attack a couple of those variables. The first one was range. It was designed to make it hard to use range finders. So it was difficult to estimate the range, and it was particularly hard to determine which direction, or at least to have a clear idea of what heading the ship was going in. For example, if you look at this ship, is the bow line A or is it line B? We know, I know that that is actually line B. But if you've never seen the ship before, you're looking at it for the first time, you could easily mistake where the bow is and mistake where it's heading. These errors combined would also affect any calculations you're doing for speed, and hopefully the chip you might miss. This is just a final shooting firing solution. But if you imagine on the battlefield, you don't just look up facing a ship and fire torpedoes. You sight it and you got to intercept it and get into a firing position. It's designed to make that harder. It was invented by a guy called Norman Wilkinson. He was an artist. I think he'd served on submarines and as a on minesweepers in World War One. And at 1917, just as the U-boats were really starting to take effect, he had this brainwave. Instead of trying to hide at sea, instead just confuse the enemy. And he devised dazzle camouflage to make it hard to use the submarine or the ship's range finders and sighting equipment. This is his own painting. He's an artist. He was joined by a large number of other artists and they applied schemes to thousands of ships. But he's not the only one who came up with this idea. Much earlier in the war, Sir Graham Kerr had proposed similar disruptive patterns. He was a biologist and he was influenced by nature. Actually, in many respects, his approach was more scientific, less artistic. He wasn't really trying to dazzle people, but it was similar. He was trying to confuse ranging, but also hide the ships in some cases. He was inspired by zebra, jaguar, giraffes, things like this. His paint scheme was applied right at the beginning. He almost as soon as the war started, he was proposing to the Navy, hey, paint your ships like this. Side by side, these are two battleships from the same class, so they're essentially the same ship, camouflaged using Kerr's uh, camouflage at the top and Wilkinson's camouflage at the bottom. After the war, there was actually quite a an argument, a court case between these guys as to who was really responsible and whether Kerr should get any money for the painting of ships. Wilkinson won. I think Wilkinson was the father of most of the dazzle camouflage we see. Kerr had similar ideas, but he was unsuccessful in getting the Navy to adopt it in any scale. One suggestion is that Wilkinson was a much easier guy to get along with. The Navy liked him more, it might be a factor. I do wonder if it's more a case of timing. Wilkinson came along when the U-boats were at their most dangerous and people were willing to try anything, whereas Kerr had come in at the beginning of the war and wasn't yet feeling desperate and the need to take any measures to stop the sinkings. So this camouflage scheme was mostly used in World War One, but it was also sometimes used in World War Two, and it was mainly by Britain where it was invented. Also widely used in the United States and later France. I think it's used elsewhere as well. I've seen some ships that maybe Russian merchant ships using it, and Italian World War Two camouflage was definitely influenced by it, somewhat similar. This is a World War One scheme. Great. These are some more World War One schemes. You can, yeah, you can sort of have your own view. Which one looks cooler? I think they all look brilliant. I can see the aesthetic appeal here. World War Two, they're slightly different. They're more modern. The Royal Navy one is looking quite different, I'd say. The US Navy one on the right, those two ships, it's interesting because in World War One, every single ship had its own scheme, which was carefully considered but different from every other ship. In World War Two, when the US Navy did apply DAZZLE paint schemes, they sometimes sort of use a standard scheme, even though it's Dazzle, and you can see the very clear similarities between the schemes on the right hand side. What's harder to see in the photographs? Nearly, well, 100% of the photographs of World War One ships in Dazzle camouflage are black and white. It's really hard to find any color photographs, even from World War Two, when photography was a bit more common, that showed Dazzle schemes. This is a rare example. It's very blurred, but you can see that the Dazzle scheme is actually quite blue and grey and subdued colours. And that's one of the things in World War Two, when Dazzle was still being used, it tended to be more camouflage colours, almost a contribution, less vivid, less obvious. This is another colour photograph I could find, very few. This particular scheme looks almost digital. Pretty cool. Two things to know about Dazzle. We talked about colour a little bit. In World War One, sometimes the colors were incredibly bright. They weren't black and white like the photographs look. I think most were black and white, if that helps, but some weren't. And we can see the official schemes included yellows, pinks, so on. They look much better in black and white. We're lucky that there's only black and white photos. The other thing to know is that it probably didn't work. Say probably, there's still room to argue about this. People did analysis of the statistics. You could argue that it somewhat worked, but it's marginal at best. It certainly didn't save very many ships. Why was that? This is interesting. In about 1919, here, there's people doing scientific tests to establish did it actually work and so on. They decided at the time, no, it probably didn't, or at least it wasn't very effective. One theory that I've heard, which is really interesting, is about rangefinders. There's two types of rangefinder here. Both of them have two sort of lenses that you look at the ship on and you use triangulation. The coincidence rangefinder, which Britain and its allies used, had a single eyepiece and you line up the two images. And you typically use a vertical part of the target to find your overlapping point. With a stereoscopic rangefinder, you put both eyes on binoculars, you put look through with both eyes at once and line the images up. It's suggested that dazzle camouflage was quite effective against coincidence rangefinders, but not at all effective against stereoscopic rangefinders. The bad news, unbeknownst to the Allies, the Germans were using stereoscopic rangefinders, at least predominantly. Therefore, dazzle camouflage didn't work half as well against the enemy's rangefinder as against our own rangefinders. We only knew that after the war. Those rangefinders, by the way, it's hard to find good photos from World War One. World War Two, they're getting ever bigger and further out. They're those things that stick out on the side of the turrets, or sometimes you see them in the upper sort of parts of the superstructure, very wide binocular type things. I do have a problem with this theory, though. It's quite compelling on technical grounds, but it doesn't really apply to U-boats. U-boats didn't have either, as far as I can tell. I'm not 100% confident on this, but I'm sure they didn't. And I've asked around, and everyone um, has a similar view. U-boats had basic periscopes, and if they had any rangefinder at all, it would have been a stadiometric rangefinder. This type uses the height of the target to estimate its distance from you. So you need to know, or at least to get an accurate reading, you need to know exactly how tall something is, or at least be able to guess it and calculate from you. And the guns on German submarines, this is through the submarine U-155, really interesting submarine, worth another talk another time. It had really big guns. I can't really tell what scopes they're using, but they were shooting at things at point blank range. It wasn't anything like as effective against these types of range finding than it would have been against the coincidence range finders on battleships. Another thing that's been done recently, some scientific research published in the Royal Society just late last year, did a scientific analysis of whether humans can, how well people rather, can judge the angle the ship is sailing at based on its camouflage. But does dazzle camouflage confuse people? And it was not very convincing. The research can be summarized that they felt that it might be effective, but only if the submariner couldn't really perceive the perspective of the ship. They used slightly less obvious language, but that's what it means. And also, even if the submariner got the angle wrong, given the ranges and speeds that things are traveling at, it was only actually going to cause a miss if the ship was traveling fast enough to get out the way before the torpedo got there. In practice, probably not. So they found that even if it confused the rangefinders, probably wasn't by a lot, and it probably wasn't enough to save the ship. Interesting stuff. A lot of people now know about dazzle camouflage. There's a lot of videos about it, I think, as well. Some of them better than others, of course. There's a bit of a revival, except the caveat is there isn't. Even the Royal Navy calls this camouflage, sometimes at least, dazzle camouflage, and says that it sort of connects back to history. It's really cool. It is done mainly for interest purposes. I don't have a problem with them calling it dazzle, but further definitions that we've looked at and how it's meant to work, it's not dazzle, it's a splinter camouflage. And other navies use splinter camouflage to hide the ship. So not dazzle. We're not seeing dazzle. I haven't seen any ships in genuine dazzle camouflage in well since World War II, as far as I know. But it looks wonderful. Great. Probably didn't work, but I'm glad that it happened. Thank you for watching this video. This is unscripted, unedited as usual. Please like, subscribe. I'm not monetized. Thank you.